So I think we are about time, so let's kick it off. First of all, welcome, Josh. I'm
Thank you.
super excited to see your presentation. The topic looks pretty awesome, so can't wait to learn more about it. And well, the floor is yours. Good luck.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. All right. Hopefully, I know we're towards the tail end of a 2-day conference. So I'll try and keep this upbeat as much as you can in a remote sense. It's a shame because I absolutely love Barcelona as a city, yet unfortunately we had to do this all remote as we have for the last couple of years, right? It's a shame. And don't worry if you are feeling a bit tired. The bit that everyone remembers from this talk comes in the first 20 seconds, and I'll get to that now. So there's this amazing word in Japanese called sujigiri. And so far, no one's ever known what this meant when I first said it, but no one ever forgets it when I tell them. And normally I ask the crowd, there isn't one, but this is fine. But the definition for it is trying out a new samurai sword on a random passerby. Kind of a weirdly specific term and is based on actual history, and that's what samurai actually did. And that's the kind of ethos and spirit we took into kind of the story I'm going to go into today. Unfortunately, I have to do an obligatory about me slide because my ego won't allow me to not. So who am I? I'm Josh Armitage. I'm the AWS practice lead at Contino. Contino are a global digital transformation consultancy. We work with highly regulated enterprises. We're talking the biggest of the big. Why you should listen to me about security? I lived in a prison colony for 13 years. Most people know that as Australia, but it still works, right? And also, I am the author of the Cloud Native Security Cookbook with O'Reilly that's coming out in about May next year. So I normally don't have any weekends anymore because I'm busy writing that. What this talk really is about is shift left learning. And we always talk about shift left in security and bringing the tools so you find the problems quicker. Really, this is about what happens when you try and bring the learning and the experience to happen quicker, right? You know, everyone has seen this kind of curve before. This graph is nothing new, but, over time, cost doesn't increase linearly. It increases exponentially. And what do we do? If we can bring the learning earlier, can we get that same kind of cost benefit? The things get a lot better if we bring it forward. Now, I'm just going to go through quickly a few different mental models that I like to use in this space. So hopefully when I talk about other things, we're all kind of singing from the same hymn sheet. So the first is the knowledge buckets, which came from I normally look this up, but I can't remember now. I think it was a Secretary of Defense in the US, effectively. And he said there's 3 kinds of knowledge. You've got your known knowns, you've got your known unknowns, and your unknown unknowns. So effectively, the things you know that you know, the things that you know you don't know, and the things you don't know yet. And normally that unknown is the really interesting piece of almost doing anything, because it's all the stuff you don't even know you didn't know, right? So we're going to go through what the known knowns were. So the story I'm going to talk about today is what happened when at the consultancy I was at in a previous life in the pre-pandemic world in Australia, where we took the case of what happens if we attack our own AWS environment, but don't tell the majority of the company that's what we're doing. What happens? How do they react? All that kind of stuff, right? And this was instigated by the CEO. I've had the question before, like, did people know? And I'm like, well, the CEO, COO, and CTO told me to do it. So I took it as I can do this and this is fine. I'm not going to get pulled up the next day, right? And we had a bunch of known knowns or things we believe that we knew that were true. One thing that was really important to us was security is everyone's responsibility. It's not your security function's responsibility. It's not the engineering. It's everyone. Everyone has to be part of security. Everyone has to be as good as they can be within reasonable limits for security to be effective. The second thing that we had was we had a defined incident response process, as pretty much every business, especially technology business under the sun, has, right? It's in the page in Confluence, well, it was in this case, people read it and they sign off on it, and maybe they're forced to reread it every 6 months or something. But do people remember it when the pressure's on? Does that really happen? This now seems like a luxury in modern times. But back in 2019, when we first did this, we were able to all be together and co-locate. We were a consultancy. Naturally, we were split across a variety of different places across the city where we were. For this, we didn't want to add the extra complexity of everyone being disparately, and also people being on client site. This was something we wanted to invest in as a company. We had about 30 people at the time. We pulled everyone off clients for that day. They didn't know this was happening, but the company effectively said, we're going to make zero money this day because this is important to us. And I'll go on about that a bit, because this is part of the power of this. Another thing that we thought we knew, we thought to a degree, we knew what people would do. We thought we knew who would step up to a degree. We thought we knew how they would try and react. So naturally, being the red team and being there and doing OSINT and all that kind of stuff, we started to put safeguards and traps and stuff in place before the day to catch people when they went down the path we thought they would. And I'll go into those a little bit as we go along. So then we had a bunch of known unknowns, things we knew we wanted to figure out from this. One of the core things when doing this is, how do you measure performance? Now, when I talk about measuring performance, I'm not talking about using this as a stick to hit people like you didn't do good. There was no good, bad, or anything in terms of this. This was just so we can measure where we are, and then when we do it again, we can see, did we get better? Did we get worse? Did we stay the same? It's about this continuous learning approach to things, not about hitting people for being bad, right? It's very much psychological safety and that kind of ethos and that kind of culture. So we came up with a few metrics. The first was time to identify. From us starting the red team activity, seeing that everyone else in the company didn't know it was going to happen, how long did it take them to figure out that we were going to do this and that we were actively doing something? Time to contain. How long until they'd actually contained me and the other engineer that were the red team? How long till they actually took away all our access and got it under control to the point where we couldn't cause any more mischief going forward? And the third was the percentage of intrusion detected. Of everything we did, once they contained it, how much stuff of what we did they even find? Another thing we wanted to understand was who will take responsibility. So as I said, this was instigated by the C-suite. They asked us to do this. And me and the other engineer were two of the most senior kind of engineers in the company. So you took effectively your entire leadership structure out. So as much as everyone was on site, we actually went next door to a coffee shop to actually do the red teaming from. So we weren't there. So it was a really interesting concept of what happens when you take away the people that everyone normally looks to in a crisis or something going wrong. What happens? Who's going to step up into that kind of leadership vacuum and take control? Another thing that we wanted to understand was processes break generally when you are 3 times the size of what you were when you put the process in. And when I joined the company, we were 10 people. As I said, we're about 30 at this time. We kind of had an idea that the processes we had probably weren't going to work anymore because we'd grown that much. 20 people doesn't sound like a lot, but going from 10 to 30 is a massive difference. And the last one was, what lenses do people possess? Now, in those 30 people, we'd hired a lot of developers. We'd hired a few operations people. We were a DevOps consultancy. We hadn't hired that many security people. And this was a case of, do the engineers we've hired and the operations people we hired, can they look at problems through a security lens? Do they have that ability? And again, in a way, it's not a problem if they don't, because then we know the gap and we can fix the gap. But are people able to look at things the right way? And normally when I talk at these conferences, mostly security people, right? And then they always complain about engineers. They don't see the things the same way that they do. It's perfectly legitimate and it is a real thing. But we wanted to find if we had any like security people deep down inside within our company already that we could look to build on, or exactly where we were. Obviously, with the unknown unknowns, we didn't know going into it what we were going to find. We knew we'd find things. We didn't know that we we're going to find as we went along. And really, what I like to bring this back to is the same concept behind chaos engineering. And since I did this, someone else has coined this process as security chaos engineering, which I found quite interesting because I saw the O'Reilly book on it. I'm like, oh, I missed my timing on this, but that's fine. And I think it's interesting that chaos engineering in the operational space with Gremlin and Chaos Monkey and the Simian Army and all that kind of stuff is huge now, right? Like it's a massive thing. And I think from, this is kind of like pen testing, but it's also like, assume your pen testing is successful, as in you've breached and you've got into your cloud environment. What actually happens then? So assume that your perimeter has holes, because any perimeter of any size really does. Day zero events are legitimate things. What happens next if someone gets into your cloud environment? And I think this chaos engineering, security chaos engineering, is going to become more of a thing in the future. If you're looking to do this yourself, set up some rules of engagement. We did, thankfully. We had a maximum bill in terms of cloud bill we were able to incur. We couldn't just go stand up the biggest EC2 instances that AWS could provide us and bankrupt the company in a day. We had to focus on keeping it under control with the amount of money that we were spending and all that kind of stuff. There were certain things we weren't allowed to do, like we couldn't go and kill identity effectively and make it so the blue team couldn't do anything. Now, legitimately, someone could have done, you can do that to a very high degree in cloud, but that would kind of stop the fun and the learning. It was not about making the blue team feel awful about themselves because they couldn't do anything, but get that right level of challenge and right level of competition that they always felt they were close. And we just keep moving that little bit forward, not kind of make them all depressed after an hour of finding out they couldn't really do anything, right? So with that, that's enough of me prattling on about all mental models and all that kind of stuff. So we'll actually move into kind of a replay of the day. So 10 o'clock in the morning, you've got to let people have caffeine before you do this. Otherwise, that's really unfair. So let people have their coffee. And we started. So one of the things we tried to do, and I think this was really important, is we're always looking to how do you channel learning through people. You always run the risk in these kind of scenarios where all your most senior people will go, okay, we're going to solve this. They go heads down, hands on keyboard. And all the junior people kind of just sit back and go, well, I'm just going to watch them do it, right? So one of the things we did is, prior to kicking this off, one of the first things we did is we killed every senior person's access at the company to AWS. We left a lot of the junior peoples around, but we killed all the senior peoples with the intent that then the senior would have to work through the junior to do what they wanted to do. So very much like a highly driven approach for learning. Like, we were big proponents of pair programming. It was very similar to that kind of model, but making sure that the people who had the most to learn were doing the most work. 3 minutes after we started, we tripped the wire. Now, this was a serverless consultancy, first and foremost. We had an alarm that would say if someone set up an EC2 machine, an alarm would go off. So we knew how to trip wires and how to set off some alerts to see if people would do that. We didn't want to run for 2 hours before anyone realized that something was going on, right? Also, at the same time, we sent out a pre-crafted phishing email that looked very much like the compliance tool that we used that triggered those alerts as well. So we did phish to see if people would click it. I'm sorry to say, people did. People always do. But it was still, we wanted to see the percentage, right? It just always happens. So 9 minutes after we started, someone noticed. A guy called Paul put his hand up, went, okay, I think something's going on. I'm going to investigate. He very quickly figures out, as he was one of the most senior people in the room, his access is already gone. So he asked for someone to come and help him. Zainab went over to help him. We instantly blatted her credentials before she could do anything as well. Now, I've already said we were in another room. How did we know what was happening in the room? And we actually had a double agent on the inside, on the blue team side, to feed us information, feed us how everything was going in the room. Partly so we could stay one step ahead, and partly so we knew if we needed to pull back a little bit because the stress level was running too high or anything else. It really is. You want to turn this into a really positive experience for everyone, not a really negative one. 3 minutes after that, it was called in the company Slack channel, this is not a drill, something's going on, everyone needs to stop what they're doing and come and help. 5 minutes after that, the CEO was called, and I had great fun watching him sipping a coffee, look at his phone and put it face down on the table and just go, well, I'm not answering. The interesting part was that is step one of the instant response procedure, was call the CEO. That's how long it took, 17 minutes. One of the interesting things that came out of this, and one thing we really didn't know, was how are people going to structure themselves when this happened, right? You've put people under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and gone, self-organize. And I think what actually happened is probably going to be pretty common if you do this on the first time, is you ended up with something like this. There was one person, Paul, at the top, the initial person to realize everyone was feeding information to him. And naturally, the next thing that happened was this. His head, metaphorically, set on fire. There was too much information, too many people trying to talk to him. Everyone was trying to feed him back information and ask what to do at the same time. And he just went, oh my God, I can't handle. Like, something needs to change. So at 10:28, they went, okay, let's stop and regroup. Let's figure out where we are, what we're trying to do. Let's get a bit of thought behind this, as opposed to everyone running around in circles. So at 10:30, they did an access poll. So who's still got access, who hasn't? That defines, what they can do, how much they can act on, who they need to kind of be sitting at keyboards, and other people can think about things a little bit more and then, kind of work through them and that kind of stuff. What was interesting with this is someone said he didn't have access when he still did as well, which I found quite amusing on the day, that someone didn't feel confident enough to do that. Now, we didn't call it out like publicly, but in person, I went to the guy after, went, okay, cool. Like, it's fine that you did, but how come? I just want to understand why you weren't comfortable kind of putting your hand up as having access. From there, with that organic structure, they split into Zainab, the person who initially helped Paul in the first place, became like a communication pathway. Paul was able to kind of extricate himself to a more full leadership role. So all the information was coming into Zainab, and she was then able to filter and give Paul the pertinent stuff, not absolutely everything going on, and he could get that extra space to think about things. And once they did that, things started to move a lot faster on their end. They started to be a lot more controlled and getting a lot more done than they were before when everyone was running in different directions. Our spy, the double agent I talked about before, people were very curious why he wasn't being very helpful. They realized what was up, because at this point we had told them it was a drill, to treat it realistically. And also, it was now a competition between me and Will on the red team and the blue team. So if anything, this maybe made them work harder, but we wanted the stress levels and the adrenaline just to drop off a little bit. So we did tell them it was a drill, but treat it as if it's real. And, naturally they kicked the double agent out, and he came and just sat next to us and grabbed a coffee and had a lot of fun watching. 7 minutes out after that, I managed to find GitHub credentials, and I broke out of AWS because someone had stored their GitHub credentials badly. Cool. All right, now, from this initial red team AWS point, we've actually broken out into other systems. And this is kind of the problem, right? Like, secrets and credentials get everywhere. People need to know how to store them properly. And this always brings me back to one of the core components of AWS, which is KMS, or KMS on Azure, or KMS on GCP, KMS on whatever cloud you want. A fundamental understanding of the key management service is absolutely critical for absolutely everyone that does anything in that cloud. It's something that a lot of people shy away from, and they do badly because it works, even if you do it badly. Like, you're still able to kind of move forward on your feature delivery, but from a security perspective, you just end up leaving stuff kind of open to the world. Normally it's, I'm in the account, I can get to anything, KMS or no KMS, because people haven't set up the keys properly. So if you have one kind of target area in any of the clouds to go after to upskill from a security perspective, IAM and KMS, the two kind of constants across all the clouds, that's where you want to target. Okay, 10:50. All start on the Western Front. They eventually realized that talking on a public Slack, which had the red team in it, was probably not effective for them being able to actually counteract us. So naturally, they went to Google Hangouts and made it so we couldn't see what they were talking about anymore. They got rid of the double agent and they went off Slack. We didn't know what they were doing anymore. Naturally, at that point, we went and threw the CTO and COO back in and go, hey, guys, you need to go back in, help them, but also rebuild that communication line, again, to get kind of the right levels of communication going back and forth. 3 minutes after that, they thought they had us contained. They didn't. It took them almost 20 minutes to realize they didn't actually have us contained, and Will and I were getting a little bit more audacious in what we were building. 5 minutes after that, we sent them all a photo of us doing things which I can't put on public slides with our fingers up to them just to kind of have some fun with it all. And 8 minutes after that, they managed to contain us. 22 minutes after that, Will and I stepped back into the room and got flipped off by everyone in the room, which is quite a feeling to just walk into a room of people you've worked with in the trenches with for a couple of years and just have them turn around and go, I hate you now. You know, it's quite fun. If you haven't done it, I do highly recommend it. And then 10 minutes after that, we moved from contain, like we had those contained. Now it was remediation. And we had set a boundary on time. If it had got to 1 o'clock and we hadn't been contained, we were just going to stop and move to remediation anyway. But they did manage to contain us in time, but still always having those kind of lines in the sand drawn so you don't take it too far. And because part of it is getting the learning bit and everything else, you don't learn from experience, you learn by reflecting on experience. So it was making sure we had enough time to reflect on everything going on. A big part of the ethos of that company was Kaizen, change for good, continuous learning. That's continuous improvement. That's really how we tried to live and move forward. And that was really important for us with this. So let's kind of step back to those measurements we talked about before. Time to identify, people with good memories might remember, was 12 minutes. The time to contain was 1 hour and 28 minutes. And the percentage of intrusion detected ended up being about 66%. Again, I have no idea whether these numbers are good or not. I have no idea if you did this at 10 different consultancies, whether you get better or worse than that or whatever. It's really not the point. The point is about going internally and looking at how you can improve. It's not about measuring yourself to everyone else in the industry. It's about, well, how can we be better tomorrow than we are today? One of the questions I got, which I find really interesting, is someone asked if it was realistic, what we did. Effectively, all we did, we didn't do anything more than someone who got fired and still had access or was it was just one set of AWS credentials was enough to do all of this. And we set everything up and did all that kind of stuff. It was just one compromise of one identity was enough to do all of this. And it was interesting because we tried to keep it realistic and people still asked us whether it was. It's like, no. It really was. That was a key thing we're trying to do, not do something like completely out there that would never happen in reality. No. This could very easily happen tomorrow. Like even with MFA and everything else, and still one employee gone rogue and this can happen. One of the things I always think about is backups never fail, restores do. Like just because you have a process or you have stuff defined, you need to test these things. You need to make sure that you actually go through the motion. And that was with the incident response process. People need to go through it to remember it. You can't just expect them to read it and have it sink in, right? Doesn't work. I think we all know it doesn't work, yet we still do it anyway. I swear I am coming close to the end. There's only like a couple of minutes left and I will try to end on time. Might go 1 minute over. One thing that we noticed from this, one big learning from me was going back to John Boyd and the Ooda loop, which I think a lot of people in security have heard about. Outside of security, a little bit less so. John Boyd was a fighter pilot known as 40-second Boyd because he could beat anyone in a dogfight in 40 seconds, effectively. And he had it all based around this particular Ooda loop, which he coined the term for. And the idea is you can observe, orient, decide, and act. And if you can go through this loop faster than your opponent or your competition, you should be able to outmaneuver them and win effectively. Where this kind of ties back into this is the fundamental problem the blue team had, or in my opinion, what the blue team had, was it took them so long to observe and figure out what was going on. They could never really hope to catch the red team and what we were doing. There was a massive gap in observability in terms of being able to see the estate, see what was happening, the change that was happening and everything else. And really at the end of the day, it was a lack of tooling. They didn't have the right tools on the ground to be able to interact this. And this was fantastic learning for us because, okay, we need to go investigate something. We need to go and find something to move forward. We identified a gap. Again, not a problem that there's a gap. It's a problem if we identify the gap and we don't fix it. We captured all the improvements, everything, any idea that anyone came throughout the entire day were captured. They were put on a giant Jira backlog. And then as a consultancy, anyone that ended up on bench, not on an engagement, they just pulled away at this backlog over time. And it was just like a consistent rite of passage. You join the company, here's a security backlog, work against this. Or if you're between engagements, cool, like here's some security tasks to be getting on with. Like it became a beginning of a tradition. From this, we ran both internal and public Ctfs. This kind of story is still talked about at the company with frightening regularity. Every time we do a team day and everyone's pulled together on site, when I was still at the company, no one trusted me anymore, and everyone would look at me suspiciously from that day on. Every time we were all off site, because everyone was always like, maybe they'll do it again, and they will do it again. And I've done it at other companies now as well, and it's just really effective. And I'll just finish off very quickly on why red team, why invest the time and the money and everything else, why go get the buy-in from the C-suite to go and do this. And fundamentally, I come back to chess on this, which may be a little bit boring to some people, but I really like this concept. The difference between a novice and a master in chess is a novice sees all the pieces as individual pieces, and that's the way they look at the board. A master looks at the board and sees groupings and patterns and things they've seen before. They have that experience internalized. They see a very different board to a novice. And really, when the chips are down, when a security incident happens, would you rather have masters alongside you or novices? Kind of the choice is yours with this. Do this, you may have some masters. Don't do this, you're going to be surrounded by well-intentioned but novices, and you're going to have a lot more problems because of that. That's it, guys. Thank you.
Brilliant, Josh. That was an incredible presentation. I was kind of, picturing on myself, you entering that room. So that moment,
that it might be going on my gravestone when I die. Is just some artist rendition of that, because it was truly an amazing time.
I agree. So I don't think there are any questions for you, but I got one if you let me. So if you could pick up just a single key takeaway or learning from your exercise that you could recommend the companies to invest the time and effort, what would be the key takeaway?
I think for me, one of the key takeaways is culture is made through action, not words. If you invest in these kind of activities and do these kind of things, you kind of build into the culture of the company that security is really important. It's something everyone has to do, and it's something we actively invest in. It's not a bolt-on at the end, but these kind of things, like the average security competency of everyone in that company after 6 months after this was 3 to 5 times higher than it was before we started this, because we made it obvious it was important to the company and that kind of stuff, and it became part of the culture. So I think that's the thing. Even if you're not in the cloud or whatever, these kind of scenarios, they just make it important and make people realize how important it is.
Definitely agree. Paulo, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you did this red team, being you part of the red team. Have you tried with external one and being on the other side, in the sense you have probably a lot of internal insight that another red team don't have? You compare the experience?
Yeah, no. We normally do it with the idea that any actor will have done their research and done their OSINT and that kind of stuff. We expect the red team to be able to target very specifically to whatever you've got internally and that kind of stuff. I think it works better that way. That you do want that kind of intelligence of what's around there, because it allows you to be smarter about what you're doing. And also, if you're talking state actors or some of the real threats that exist to certain businesses, they are going to do that. It's not just script kiddies downloading stuff off the dark web and running it, really. I mean, those exist as well, right? But when you're thinking about this, you should be playing under the expectation that they know just as much as you do of your architecture. So no, I've been fortunate to always be red team centric in this. I think I do okay in the blue team side, but normally I think I have the mindset, and people see that I don't want to say cruel, but I take quite a bit of pleasure out of doing this on the red team side. So they're normally I will get you to do it because you'll do it right. But I think, and running the red team and getting that kind of gap I talked about, where you're not pushing too hard and you let people catch up and feel like they're making progress and all that kind of stuff, that takes a bit of nuance and a bit of experience to try and get right. Because sometimes you just get people to go way too far or not far enough and everything else, and just constantly keeping that competition level there is important as well.
Yeah, so you have like actual, the people, so you can better measure this level of pressure, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. The more you know, the better. I think the better job you can do, right? And yeah, you want to know people. You want to make sure you're not pushing people too hard, and depending on the culture of the company and stuff like that, the amount you can push and everything else kind of changes and all that kind of stuff. So the more you know, the better an experience. Because again, you want it to be positive for everyone involved, because that's how it becomes something that kind of takes on a life of its own. If people have negative experiences of it, then it starts to die quite quickly.
So we really enjoyed your presentation. I hope to see you face to face in Barcelona in future editions. And all the best with your book as well. I'll keep an eye on your book, once it gets out. All the best. Thanks for your presentation and your time in the conference.
No, thank you guys. Really honored to be here.